Adam, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Adam, can you talk us a little bit about your story? So you've had an incredible journey up until this point, mate, and a personal journey as well. But can you share what has been happening with you, say, over the last 20 plus years?
Well, where do I start? Uh, that's I don't know. That's literally I'm asking where do I start? So yes, I guess the primary thing that sticks out the most in my history is the cancer. So, the age of 17, I was diagnosed with a bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma, which is an intraoscular bone cancer, meaning on the inside of the bone. So from 15 to 17, I was actually developing the tumor, but I was oftentimes being misdiagnosed because I was 150 pounds, 5'10", and a pretty healthy, appearing and looking. I didn't look like I had cancer. I don't know what that necessarily looks like, but typically when people are being diagnosed with an illness like that, they also have other symptoms and appearances and things like that. So for 2 years, it was going misdiagnosed. So I ended up finally getting a diagnosis. It ultimately led to me losing my leg, so I've got a prosthetic on the lower limb. And then I was in chemotherapy for a year and a half. So I was essentially in the hospital for approximately 340 out of 410 days over that year and a half period, doing pretty intense chemotherapy treatment for the Ewing sarcoma. After that, I survived that obviously because I'm still sitting here today. After that, I didn't just skip off into my 20s and say, "Ooh, we survived life. Let's go take on the world." I struggled a lot through my 20s. So I was doing a lot of things productively. Like I advanced, I got my bachelor's in psychology, and then I just jumped right into graduate school and completed my master's science in clinical diagnostics and intervention, and then immediately went into professional work from there. I had gotten married at the time. I had purchased a home at the time. I was doing all of the necessary things that you do, between the ages of 23, 25, 27, whatever. But because of everything that I was struggling with from the cancer diagnosis internally and on a personal level, the 20s were a wreck. I got up to over three. The last time I looked at a scale, my body weight was, I think, 313 or higher. So the last time I looked at it was 313, and I know I didn't do well for the next 2 or 3 weeks after I looked at the scale that one time. Um, and then my consumption of alcohol. I could consume a fifth a day and still have a coherent conversation with you. And if you didn't know me personally, or if you didn't smell it on me, you wouldn't know. Or at least I thought that. That was kind of the delusion of the addiction or whatever. Um, Beyond that, I had a sequence of events where I had a lot of loss. I had owned a psychiatric practice at that time. I've been working in clinical practice since 2009. I've been a business owner since 2017. I own a consulting firm in the United States, kind of just helping people organize, personal and professional life, and strategic, stuff and different things like that. But the clinical stuff, the mental health stuff, that's been since 2009. Started with adolescents, and then eventually started working with adults as well. But really what I recognized with my own struggles was that we've got very specific periods of our lives that if we don't get the right traction, it will throw off so many things so much quicker. And I get diagnosed at 17, and then I'm released from a pediatric children's hospital at the age of 19, being told, go off and be an adult and live in the world. And I'm like, I have no, clue what that means. I don't understand. So I just did the things that I thought I was supposed to do. So that's why I jumped into the education. That's why I jumped into the relationship. That's why I jumped into the I buy a house, I'm sitting here checking the boxes. Like, what are you supposed to do between 23 and 25? And if you don't do it, what does society think? It struggles a lot with that when it comes to identity. So you finally get up to a point, 27, I decided to stop drinking alcohol. I tried to not drink for 30 days, and that was 8 years ago. So that 30 days just rolled over into 60, rolled over into 90, rolled over into 1 year, 2 year, 3, I got sober in January of 2017. I established my company on paper in June of that same year. So I get sober, and then I started my company, and then that's really what kept me sober. Is now I've got something I've created and something I've got to keep moving and I've got to keep running, because it will not be successful without me, because I'm the only one. Not because it's like this ego thing. It's just like I'm legitimately the only person that's doing it. So there's nobody else that works in my company. It's just me. It's just literally me. And I just have a company just because that's how you do it professionally in a business way. So got sober, and I lived in Missouri, which is right smack dab in the middle. If you know what the Kansas City Chiefs are, that's where they're at. That's where I'm from. I lived there for almost 30 years of my life. And then I finally just ran away from Missouri, and I moved to the mountains of Colorado in a town of 1,800 people at 7,500 feet up. And just kind of isolated for 12 months and kind of asked myself, pretty clearly and directly, like, what am I doing and what do I want to do and how am I going to get there? And made a plan. In part of that process, I've always had this kind of idea of not just having like one line, but having like multiple things that it can actively be doing that keeps me motivated and keeps me on point and keeps me, good traction and whatever else. And so the stem cell thing was because I ended up breaking my hip when I was 25. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Devil Wears Prada, but I was in a circle pit and I broke my hip when I was 25, and I had to have it replaced because
How did you break your hip?
I was in a circle pit and I toppled over and I cracked the femoral head of my hip, and I'm dealing with avascular necrosis because of a prednisone steroid from the cancer treatment. And so the bone, the blood was cut off to the bone during that period. So the interior of the bones of the ball and socket joints, both in my shoulders and in the femoral heads, are dead. So the exterior of the bone is good. So as long as that stays healthy, it's not a problem. But I fell over at a Devil Wears Prada concert, cracked that femoral head, and I had to get my hip replaced. Well, the shoulder's not been doing too hot, either. And they tell me that
hell, mate.
Shoulder is the next thing that has to be replaced. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. And then that's when I started investigating like alternative options, non-surgical options for joints. And then that's how I stumbled into the stem cell thing. And it just so happened to be this turn of events that somebody in my community that I was personally familiar with, her and her husband, were establishing a stem cell clinic. And then all of a sudden now we've got Renew Medical Center in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico.
Yeah.
So we live down here and I do the consulting stuff, both for businesses and both for individuals remotely. Sheath Underwear is actually one of my consulting clients, the best underwear in the world. Check them out. It's a dual pouch mail system. It's phenomenal. The hoodies are also spectacular. And yeah, now I'm just actively, I had a book, that was in my head for 10 years. But the real the concept of it existed. I want to write a book that helps people. But I didn't know any more than that, what that actually meant. And then I had my own struggles all through my 20s that I never felt credible enough to actually legitimize it into a book. I could help people on an individual level because it was almost as if I was walking with them in that moment. I'm struggling just as much as you are. You're just not going to read it off of me. The reason why I know how to help you in this moment is because I actively need someone to do this for me too. And sometimes even those do as I say, not as I do moments, where it's, and that's oftentimes one of the, they say the providers are the hardest ones to help. A doctor's never going to go see a doctor. A mental health provider is like, well, I can pull a book off of a shelf. I'm not going to pay somebody else. Like, what do you?
Yes.
Yeah, I owe people $80,000 for an education about how to help people. I think I could figure out how to help myself. It's like, no, we don't. We're negligent. You think about the way that people grind in the gym. It's like, I'll just go grind harder. It's like, no, at some point in time, you got to step in there and see what's going on up in the head. You can't just grind it out, because what happens when you blow your back out because you're doing 2-a-days because you're too stressed, and now you can't train, and now you can't. I mean, I had one of my patients, all he did was split the ligament right here and he couldn't roll, for 3.5 months, jujitsu. Cause he only knew, gi, that's how and so you have to have, thumb mobility for anything.
Yeah.
So
Adam, what would you say was the hardest part of your cancer journey? And I think some of the nicest, the kindest, most benevolent people I've ever met in my life have come through some sort of hardship and adversity. And by the sound of it, mate, you're doing some pretty fucking remarkable things. But what would you say was the most difficult part about your cancer, and both physically and emotionally?
the hardest, I mean, I chuckle because the hardest thing about it is the easiest thing to answer. And I've often said this to other people before. I wanted to die from 13 to 17. And then when I was offered the diagnosis of cancer, it was like an easy way out, because now all of a sudden, I wanted to take my life for those 4 years. And now I'm being told, hey, your life is going to be taken. You have a 25% chance, of successful outcome, in this treatment. And so it was almost like a relief in the beginning. But it eventually got to a point where I was recognizing the people around me are, persistently cheering and rah, rah, rah. And when you can do it and you're so, and whatever else. And it's almost like, okay, well, now I kind of have to. Now I'm obligated, to survive. The reason I struggled through my 20s was because I didn't want to be there. One thing I used to persistently tell myself is I didn't sign up for this into adulthood after 1927. I didn't sign up for this. In America at that time, we were dealing with a housing crisis because the banks were, screwing people and giving people loans that were never eligible or qualified for what they were being loaned out for. And so, every dream that we were told as a kid all of a sudden wasn't going to happen. So I think I'm going to die. I've got no plan beyond 19. And then all of a sudden I'm told I'm okay, and you got to go out and be an adult. So it was kind of this, like, I was okay and protected in a children's hospital. So my headspace was fairly okay. The way my family looked at it was kind of no different than the way that people look at the flu. This is risky. There's some things that make, yes, I didn't die. Well, there's a conversation maybe we can have if we have a second episode. There's one dream event that I still kind of have some unsettling memories with. But other than that, that was probably from a physical. I mean, the physical thing was the weight gain, because it started during the treatment. And then it carried over because of the alcohol. So because of the steroids that I was on, I mean, again, I'm 6 foot tall and I naturally carry like 178 to 185. That's where I kind of fluctuate. And again, I got up to, like I said, 313 or more. And so it started because of the sedentary, requirement where I just physically didn't have the energy to get up. Some of the medications were affecting me. And then it eventually evolved into poor life choices and decisions, post health. And that started, and so it all started 17 to 19, and then it just carried over for that next decade or more as far as anything health-wise or physical-wise. The worst outcome from the treatment of the cancer has been the avascular necrosis, where it interferes with the structure, of the bones themselves. And so can't trust that I can walk in 20 years. That's why I'm part of a stem cell clinic, is I gotta somehow catch my body up, at some point in time, so that it slows down in its age, because it took a beating.
Yes. Yeah. Stem cell is pretty remarkable, Adam. Like, I've got a lot of friends that are also martial artists as well. Like, I'm a martial artist. I've been fighting for over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my good friends, Gavin Hain, who's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, he went over to Mexico to do some stem cell treatment because he's had a lot of debilitating injuries, in particular his back and his shoulder. And
Mm-hmm.
he talks about obviously the recovery, and he feels like he's almost 100%.
Yeah.
From what you have done with your research and what you've also done with your treatment, what would you say are some of the benefits for stem cell? And, there's a lot of report people are more turning towards stem cell now as opposed to surgery.
Well, and a lot of what, both with my book and both with the things that I advise within my consulting practice, is to just educate yourself beyond what's being told to you. Be a free thinker and have, the ability to investigate. 3/4 of the world seem to be on the same page. Japan nationalized mesenchymal stem cells from allogenic sources as a nationalized form of medical care in about 2015. So for the last 10 years, they have just been cranking out phenomenal data, and really good research, just kind of showing, the outcomes and the outcome potential, not just for orthopedic or spine related injuries, but also neurological, gastrointestinal, cardiological, cardiovascular, um, even beyond that, pulmonary, autoimmune, everything but cancers, has the potential to be assisted and aided by stem cell development. And so it's really been a valuable tool for me, because it kind of helps enhance, what I call my portfolio on being able to kind of help people. So now what I've created is a book to help your mind and access to help your body. And so that just, it kind of covers, those bases. For us to be kind of the most effective people, we have to do something mental, physical, and spiritual every day. That's what enables you, like the best balance, as they say, or whatever. So being able to intelligently educate people about accessible resources, and also limitations of it. You and I talking about, like, hey, the hardback's not available to you, but the paperback is, or I don't know why, but it's still inaccessible. My book is still accessible to you on Amazon Australia. So, but obviously, you guys being on an island kind of off on your own, you do have to travel out, for these types of resources. And so that's why we've got some of you guys that come to Mexico, some of you guys will go kind of the other direction and go to India, and you'll see them kind of sometimes go up into the Asia, a little higher up into the Asias. But really getting the world onto a cohesive understanding of this form of medicine, as well as the future of medicine, is really what the purpose is. And then also being able to provide people with an intelligent resource for, how to help, both yourself, or find how to, find help from others. is what's needed.
Yes. Talk to me about your book, Adam. What was the decision to write a book?
I kept telling people, I kept using this phrase. I came up with this phrase, fox in a bear trap, where I have struggled my entire life with being able to ask for help. And oftentimes I'm the fox caught in the bear trap, trying to chew off my own leg, afraid of what the hunter is going to do to me, not knowing that the hunter is there just to release the trap. Um, so really just kind of it's a collection essentially of the tools and resources that I've collectively used for myself to get through the things that I actively just told you. The cancer outcomes, that the struggling with the alcohol, the anxiety, depression, the everything else, suicidal thinking, divorce, like everything else under the sun. Like, I didn't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I'm gonna pick a better life." Like, it did actually require and take some work. It does actually require and take some accountability. You think about the way that you train in the gym, like it does. It's not just gonna magically happen. You got to be diligent. You've got to, be accountable. You've got to be reliable, and assurant to yourself. And oftentimes, I wouldn't be, and that's where I would get negligent, in that kind of care. So by now having a tangible resource, because it's a workbook, it's not just a read book. You read part of it, but then there's an actual section where it's intended for you to write into it. And if you're not comfortable enough or even confident enough going into a therapist or even another person and asking for help, what it created is something for you to either figure out who, where, or how to ask, or figure out how to establish some level of mental stability and concept of self-worth that'll get you to a point to where you can receive help. Because that was the biggest struggle that I had, was that I would nip at every person that tried to help me throughout my 20s. And all that I am is just this fox in this little bear trap with my leg caught. Funny enough, I'm missing a leg, but so it's really, and it's also the intention is that it's the first book, of a trilogy, and that the next, book or the next two books will be new developing concepts. So the first book is how to ask for help. The second book is how to establish hope. And then the third book is how to live, a fulfilling life, covering, all of that kind of that progression in that development, so.
Yeah. It's interesting, Adam. If I recall, there are four things people struggle to ask. I can think of two of them right now. So one of them, a lot of people struggle with, is being able to apologize and say sorry. The other one is I need help.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a world right now, Adam, where the majority of suicides are men. 3/4 of successful suicides are men. Every minute, a man around the world takes his own life. And I've tragically lost friends to suicide. And one of the hardest things, I think, is grappling with the idea of, somebody that needs help. You want to help them, but at the same time, it goes back to that saying, you can lead a horse to water,
Right.
but you can't make it drink.
Right.
But what advice would you give to others to ask the right questions to be able to help someone that they care about?
I used to, so my career started in a pediatric psych hospital where I was actually working on the hospital side, and these were emergent situations. And so they were brought in and they had to stay there for 5 to 7 days to stabilize their safety. I worked there for 5 years. And one of the things that we used to develop is I kind of had this like little three question rule where it was like, are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I do anything to help? all of those three questions are yes or no questions. And honestly, you don't need verbal words. You could even take hand signals or head shakes on those. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I do anything to help? When people know that, they'll say no on all three of those. But the fact that they know that you're probably going to come back again in an hour or two and ask it again is assuring enough that keeps them like, hey, this is annoying, but I think this person cares. It doesn't have to be, how do I fix this? How do I save you? How do I blah, 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 blah. You know, a lot of the times, especially more often than not, when I've both dealt with my own suicidal episodes as well as suicidal episodes of clients and friends, handful of the times, if not more often than not, it's anxiety-based and not depression-based. People are so overwhelmed in that moment that they don't actively know what to do to fix it. So an exit from this situation is the only thing that makes sense. But if we think about the three basic reactions of an animal, fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, well, what can we do to just activate one of those? How do we get the person out of the environment that they're in? You know, you think about, like, if a person is struggling or if an animal is struggling, do we change the animal or do we change the environment? And more often than not, we want to change the animal. And it's like, no, hold on. Switch up the environment. Let them crash with you for a night or two. You know, take them somewhere different. Put them on the road. You know, help them get out of the mundane routine that they're persistently stuck in. You know, when we talk about depression is not sadness. It's a decrease of functioning. It's a decrease of activity. You don't pee and poop as much when you're depressed because your body legitimately its metabolic rate slows down. I was depressed one time and I did not eat solid food for 27 days. I got to shakes by about like day 11. I was drinking water every day, you know, but that was really the only thing I was consuming. And people don't really know the rule of three. So 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. I kind of knew that, and I knew like, okay, well, I need to at least put some nutrients in but I just was not hungry. I would come down, I would sit in a rocking chair, and I would look out a window, and I would watch traffic. And I did that for a month. My service dog had just died. A relationship had ended abruptly. And I had just exited ownership from the practice that I absolutely loved and adored. But it just wasn't working for, you know, where I was at and where my headspace was. And so it was pretty activating. And that's what finally put me on the road. And the intention was to go to Colorado in the United States, up in the mountains, and to write this book. But I had to do some of my own healing to get to that point. That's why it took me, you know, the plan was 3 years ago, the book was supposed to be written. And then finally 3 years later, I finally figured it out. Or so, you know, that's what I tell myself.
Yes. Some of the steps a person can take, Adam, towards healing, especially if they're in a severe state of depression, it's easier said than done. But the hardest part about it is just taking action. You know, I've obviously had my fair share of adversity and ups and downs. Men in particular right now too, Adam, in a difficult conundrum. They don't feel needed in the world, mate. Women especially now are doing exceptionally well in the workforce. They're doing amazing things. But men, unfortunately, I think have fallen drastically behind. I think if I remember correctly, there'll be 2 women for every 1 man completing a 4-year US college degree by 2030. So they're not too interested in education. They're not too interested in pursuing their own goals and endeavors. A lot of men are very addicted to porn and video games. So they just feel helpless. But for someone that's in a situation like that wants to get out of it, what are the steps that they need to take?
It's rather simple. I mean, that's part of I'm in this, I get kind of, I have to kind of, I'm stumbling all over my words because, I drank, like I told you, I was drinking. There was a point in time where I was up to a fifth and a half a day in alcohol.
Wow.
When it was at its best, that's what I would say. When it was at its best, I was up to a fifth and a half a day. I was drinking. I began drinking probably 14 to 27 consistently, 3 to 4 times a week. Not so much in the early teenage years, probably by 16 or 17, it was, every Friday, Saturday. And then by college, it was every Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then by the time I could buy my own alcohol, it was drink heavy on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then only drink a little bit, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Sunday. So by definition of what the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version 5 says, I had alcohol use disorder, but I did not have the physical presentation of alcohol addiction. So again, I stopped drinking in 30 days. That was 8.5 years later. I just one day said to myself, I'm going to stop drinking today. And then I held myself accountable to that. Part of the trouble that people have is what's called, dopamine and dopamine replacement, problem is if you take away one thing, you got to bring something else back in. I don't know if we were on the line yet, if we were recording, but I told you the reason why I stayed sober was because I started that company. I had a new addiction, and it happened to be a healthy addiction. If people say here and say, oh, I want to change, it's like, well, shit in one hand and wish in the other, because this whole want, a dream with no action is nothing, a plan with no action is nothing but a dream. A dream, it sounds like a wonderful thing, but if you don't do anything with it, it doesn't actually become anything resourceful or beneficial to you. So yes, people sit here and say, oh, I want to be sober. I want to be healthier. I want to have a better job, but I don't want to do the things that it requires. I don't want to wake up early. I don't want to change my lifestyles. I don't want to do this or that. And then you do have folks that say, I do want to change this. I do want to do that, but I don't know how. And then you have the small population that says, I do want to change these things. I don't know how, so I'm going to go to somebody to ask. And then you go back, the first chapter of my book goes through like an entire list of like 10 or 15 different reasons as to why people avoid asking for help. And a lot of that has to do with, the things that people struggle with, the embarrassment, the shame, the, insert here, whatever it is. And so being able to kind of get to those points and places, it takes a lot of accountability. And I think that's what people struggle with the most. They say, oh, I want, people want the Ozempic body, but they don't want to put the work in to keep it. They don't want to go to the gym for 6 months. They'd rather just earn enough money to pay somebody to trim it off. It's the convenience. Life has become too convenient nowadays, and people have to for anything. And that's where some of the ethic has been lost, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
And you said something earlier that I definitely want to go back to, because you hit it really kind of on the head. I've got a pending TED Talk coming up in the States, and part of the conversation, or what the conversation is going to kind of be around, is this notion of, when you have traumatic experiences, it changes the way that you see the world. I can't do normal stuff. You can't beat cancer at 19 and then do normal stuff after that. That's just not how it pans. That's just not what you're supposed to do. And there's been moments, there were moments in my 20s where that's what I struggled with, was I'm not going to do anything better than ever beating cancer. Would you like to know something interesting? I've been to Australia. I was sent to Australia with my family to the Great Barrier Reef because that's how big of a fucking deal my cancer was. I asked to go to Key West, Florida, and they said, well, why not go to Australia? And I said, oh, I didn't realize that was an option. So I went to some little place called Lizard Island in Great Barrier Reef. And then they gave us a handful of cash, just to have for, all these adventures. So I got to touch a leatherback turtle. I got to do a whole bunch of other stuff, So I'm sitting here coming back to America thinking like, okay, well, I'm going to die now. Like, they sent me to Australia. Like, I had my one trip. I had my Make-A-Wish trip. So now life is over.
Yes.
And then I survived it. And now those are my 2 marks. Now you have to top beating cancer. And now you have to top traveling to Australia. And it's like I'm not going to be able to do that. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. And so that's where it's really kind of taken a lot. And again, it took me, I got sober at 27, but I didn't put it together until I was 33 because it took my own accountability of myself. So again, I'm saying this not because I see people struggle with it. The lack of accountability is the reasons why people can't initiate change. I'm also advocating to that. The reasons why I did not initiate change was because I wasn't accountable.
Yeah. The price of progress, Adam, is pain. And I reflect on my own journey, mate. And, as I mentioned before, I'm heavily into martial arts. I've always been into fitness, but I know that doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing day in, day out has a profound effect just on my mental clarity, but also being able to give so much more to other people. And the byproduct of that is it makes me happy. Mm-hmm. I get a lot more gratification doing things for others than doing things for myself. But I know that putting myself through the strenuous workout, it's getting through those hard times, just enables me to give so much more to other people. Do you feel that way too, mate? Because of everything that you've overcome and you've built up this persona of strength and resiliency, you have much more to give. And that also gives you a positive outlook on life. But do you feel that way about how things have turned out for you?
I would say most times, yes. But there is those moments where the exhaustion does creep in. But definitely in the sense of one of the stories that I have yet to tell in full detail that I will tell one day to the world was, so I'm an Eagle Scout, which in the United States is a thing, where you learn a bunch of skills and you do a bunch of stuff. Well, one of the big trips is a hiking trip that they have in New Mexico, America, where it's 110 miles over an 11-day period up a 14,000-foot mountain. And then you hike to the peak, whatever else. You're carrying a 60-pound pack because you are camping on site with everything on the back of your body. That trip was July of 2004. I was diagnosed with cancer in March of 2005. And my leg was removed in June of 2005. So within 12 months, I hiked 110 miles up a 14,000-foot mountain with a 60-pound pack, and then I have my leg taken from me 12 months later. So being able to learn, I had to learn how to walk again after the prosthetic, and then I had to learn how to walk again after the hip. And so my intention from this point forward is to now challenge myself. I've been challenged mentally, and I've overcome a tremendous amount. Now I get to play with the physical. Now that the headspace is good, now that the mind is right, I get to go fuck around with my body and see how disabled am I actually. Do I just abuse the good parking, or am I actually a disabled person? Let's get out there and let's see. Can I go hike a 14er with a 60-pound pack in one leg? Can I do these other physical challenges and these other things? the way that I operate, especially with the life that I live now, is that I've always actively got to be working towards some type of goal. I finished the book. I got the book published December 20th. And then there was a period where I didn't really pick up traction because I was kind of like, oh, I'm done. Now I just wait. And it's like, no, this was the easy part. Writing the book is the easy part. It's the marketing that's hard. It's the getting it out there that's hard. And that's, or again, where it's like, I've got to get my mind right and my body right. You think about Stephen Hawkins, he was somebody that was supposed to die in his early 20s, but because of the level of intelligence that he had, he was able to keep his physical body, alive for far, far longer. But because his mind was so strong, in that nature. So no matter to what level your physical body is failing, as long as you have strength within your mind, and as long as you actively have others around you that are advocating for, your wellness and your well-being, then that will do good for you. And as long as you're doing things that enhance your character and make you feel good, it gives you reason and purpose.
Yes.
Being altruistic is a phenomenal thing that so many people neglect nowadays. And it just means, it's a very simple concept, doing things for others without the intention of anything in return. Why'd you do that? Oh, just because. I went and got tacos. So in Mexico, we eat tacos for breakfast. It's the, most amazing thing in the world. And my tacos were all of about $7 American. And I had a 500 peso bill. So it was 150 pesos, and I had a 500 peso bill, and I just gave the guy the whole bill. The breakfast was good, and he just looked at me like, huh? Like, serious? And I said, yeah, have a good day. And just being able to have those, like, little moments where you're able to kind of do those things and not really have a reason or purpose, to do it is...
Yeah.
It actually activates, dopamine in the brain and body and makes you feel good. But yes, you are correct with what you were saying. That physical going in and grinding in the gym gets rid of, a lot of that negative stress, that we develop into the body. You got to burn off that cortisol somehow.
Yes.
There's research out there that shows that methamphetamine in utero, so when women are pregnant with children, if they use methamphetamine drugs and or if they are exposed to high levels of the mother's stress, which presents as cortisol, it has the same post-birth effects. So a child exposed to a mother's stress is now just as dangerous as a child exposed to illicit heavy narcotics.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes a problem.
Yeah. There's a phrase, Adam, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And I think we're going through hard times at the moment right now, in particular men, and I refer back to men because I am a man. I understand the male experience. But what do you wish more people knew about men's mental health? Because it's different from women, Adam. And I've had a female mental health advocate on my podcast. She tragically lost her brother to suicide. Her name's Samantha Wood. She's an amazing person, what she's doing for men's mental health, but she now understands the psychology of men. Right. Because she's had to live through it, right. Through losing her brother. But there's an enormous amount of weight on men's shoulders, and it's a little different from women. And also treatment. I think male depression gets treated like female depression. All men want to feel is capable and powerful. Give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile. I think of the story about the Blitz. Do you know the story about the Blitz, Adam?
No, give me details.
So I've talked about this before on a previous podcast. So the Blitz happened just before the war happened in World War II. when there was explosions going off in London, and you had these comatose patients that were just completely catatonic, unresponsive, and they'd just been bedridden for years on end because of shell shock and trauma. And when the bombs went off, there were sirens and just total annihilation going off. And there was no one to drive essential service trucks or fire engines and ambulances to rescue the casualties. These men that were completely comatose and catatonic got up out of their beds and started driving essential service vehicles to help the casualties.
Yep.
They got up and they knew what needed to be done. And that's what I mean about men feeling needed. Men want to feel wanted. They want to feel capable. They want to feel powerful. But what do you wish more people knew about men's mental health?
That it does exist, and that's one of the biggest struggles, and one of the hardest things that we actively deal with is the notion of the whole reason why I wrote a book was predominantly for guys so that they don't have to go ask other people for help. If you have a book now that helps you figure it out yourself, then you'll be more inclined. Because here's the thing, and this is especially how men work. If you ask a man to go to a therapist, if it's a voluntold type of thing, that's never going to be successful. If you even hand them a book and say, hey, maybe read this, that still won't be successful. But if you accidentally leave a book out on the counter for 2-3 weeks in a row, eventually it's going to get thumbed through if you read the title, long enough. But a lot of the times we as men don't have the ability to show any level of weakness or any level of ability. So as a person that's both physically disabled and somebody that sometimes gets kind of overstimulated, like I'm very hyper vigilant to my environments and situations. I can't be too loud, can't be too noisy, and I gotta know everybody and everything kind of going on around me. There's also some trauma history to that because of working in a children's psych hospital for 5 years. I feel more comfortable around unstable adults than I would around unstable children. When you have a 3.5 foot, tall person that's capable of killing you, it's spooky. No, I miss it. I used to love working at the hospital. So, but no, that's the biggest thing is that a lot of the times we have to be caregivers for others. We have to be the security of house and home. If you actually think about the biological difference between men and women, and the reasons why men's brains develop slower than women is because women are supposed to be the childbearing, they're childbearing and reproducing, nature, and we're supposed to be the hunter-gatherer. So we don't even have the capacities, to talk about emotions until we're in our mid-20s, and then honestly, the adult male doesn't even develop, a full personality until the early 40s. So you got a bunch of guys that are kind of walking around that really don't know how to express themselves other than through physical action and work and some type of validation or award-based structure. You did this, good job. Now go do more. Okay, I can do that. We are very task-oriented people. You think about Call of Duty, or you think about Vegas, or you think about, whatever. As long as we have bright things that flash in front of us and we get high praise, everything's fine. Everything's good. I don't have to talk about how I feel on the inside. And that's where you'll get these moments where you'll have, you think about like Anthony Bourdain. I know you know who that is. He's somebody who took his life, who I had clients coming into my office saying, how can somebody with that amount of money and that kind of life end up taking their life? My life sucks. And I don't, if he can't find a reason to live, then what am I fighting for?
Yes.
And that's sometimes what's hard is because we have to put on this external presentation of how we look and what we are. It's almost like we have to have like a brand of ourselves, especially in our professional work. I could never struggle as a mental health provider because think about the sentence right there contradicts itself. Wait, you're a struggling mental health provider? I didn't write this book 3-4 years ago because I didn't know if I wanted to be alive. So how am I going to write a book about asking for help when I didn't know how to ask for help?
Yeah.
That's how we operate as men. I've got to put something into a tangible goal, a professional business, goal for me to finally, show people, hey guys, this is how I actually did it. I know you watched me get sober, lose the weight and whatever else, and you kind of all just pat me on the back and say, hey, good job. But there was a lot of work that I did. It wasn't just random. And here's how. And hopefully it will help you in some level or way, because I know that I've struggled with everything that you're talking about is the reasons why I almost didn't make it out of my 20s. My
Yes.
drinking had nothing to do with alcohol addiction. It had to do with the fact that I didn't or I couldn't manage my mental health. I couldn't sleep and I was persistently in pain. Okay, well, that's 90% of men in general. Not that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Like,
saying.
yeah.
It's a big number. And we just wake up the next day, we look at our schedule, and we do what we're supposed to.
What would you say to somebody in particular? I can speak for men, but what would you say to a man that's doing all the right things? He's exercising, he's getting up early, he is working hard on his business, he's highly ambitious, but life just seems to drag him down. Maybe he's lost his wife, he doesn't see his kids, but he's doing all the right things. He's doing everything that he's supposed to be doing, but still he's having a
Says who?
difficult time. Sorry?
Says who?
Well, just him, the
That's
person
the
that he,
answer. I mean,
yeah, him.
that's what you and I were talking about earlier. Who says that that's actually what makes your life better? Who
Yeah,
says that if you do this checklist, you will have a good quality outlook and position of life? I mean,
yeah,
when we operate off of society's definitions of the things that we are supposed to have or not have, then you're going to live a very disrupted and disorganized quality of life. And
yeah.
I've always been against the grain. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a book called The Giver that I read when I was like 12 years old. And it was this black and white dystopian. And then this 12-year-old kid walks into this meeting, and The Giver is when you were 12 years old, you walked into The Giver and The Giver gave you a job. And then that was your task to society. But then there was this red apple, and this kid sees this red apple, and he even mentions it to the giver. And then the giver, the whole book changes, and we realize that this kid is the holder of memory and history. So he realizes, and nobody else in the community and in the town has any memories of what life used to be like. But they also have no memories of trauma, no memories of negative experience, no memories of nothing. They just have their job and duty, and they live in their community. And
Yeah.
in reading something like that at a very young age, I kind of realized and recognized, like, hey, I kind of see the world differently. And helping other people kind of realize and recognize, like, hey, listen, going against the grain is not a bad thing. Like, you are able to kind of step out and do your own thing. As long as you're not causing harm to yourself or others, you're able to make any choice that you want with anything you're actively doing. To answer your question in the easiest detail, if a person is doing all of those things and then their life is still not increasing in quality, then they have to change the environment. Figure out if
Yeah.
you're the problem or figure out if the place is the problem. I can move from one state to another and think that all my issues and things are going to change. But if I replicate the same patterns and behavior, I'm just going to create the same environment. It's called roosting.
Yes.
If you just go in there and just make it again your own, then you're not living, to your highest potential with what you have the ability to have. And we often play this game where it's like, well, but no, if I just get to this point, it will be better then. And it's like, says who? Where do you have that written as a guarantee? Like, because when that doesn't happen, who do I file a complaint to? Who do I submit this to and say, hey, the outcome that you told me didn't get achieved. I want my money back. Well, that's not how life works.
Yeah.
Be decent if it did, but
Yeah. Men, Adam, they are fucking lonely. The number of friends a man would report having back in the early 90s, I think, was about 6. Now that number is 0. Women do an amazing job at keeping closer connections to their friends and family. Men, unfortunately, I think as life goes on, you start to drift away from people from high school and friends that you made in the future, or in the past, I should say. But also, I think men, when they get married, they also lose contact with their close friends. And then their kind of social network generally becomes that of their partner. And I think also I read somewhere that when men go through a terrible divorce, I think that the percentage is astronomical. They're more likely to kill themselves, obviously because they have the back burner with dealing with a hefty divorce, but also because they lost connections with their friends. But how can we help men better navigate their way through life and just being able to express vulnerability?
one of the things that you were describing, and you've kind of opened up a really good discussion that has to be had, is everything that you were talking about that was disrupted, in a male's life potentially is identity based. So the problem with it is that if you don't have a core base identity of who you actually are, when you do have disruptions to these titles that we acquire, whether it be husband, whether it be supervisor, whether it be, insert here, whatever title you have, that is what you are now identified as. And in males' work, you even go back into all the, original times. That's how everybody was measured. Even in the military, you carry it on your chest. That's your level of merit. That's literally what that meant, was how many rows of things do you have on your shirt? That's how much respect I'm going to give you in this conversation. What is your level of merit? And so we have to wear that. We cannot have our heart on our sleeve because it literally will cast shadow to what's on our chest, and that's where men struggle, in some of that the most.
Yes. Comedian Chris Rock, Adam, he famously said, only women, children, and dogs
Yep,
are
I remember that quote.
loved unconditionally. A man is only loved on the condition that he can provide value. And if you think about this too, mate, from an evolutionary perspective, we are generally the disposable sex. But when the war happened between Ukraine and Russia, the women and children were able to leave, but the men had to stay and fight.
Right.
And we know throughout history, just read a history book of the thousands of or millions of men that have died in battle. But also, if you think about this too, mate, the only time a man will receive flowers is at his funeral. And I think also too, mate, that men are also starving of appreciation. We do all these amazing things. We send rockets into space and back. Elon Musk. We have people that are just amazing people that have done some incredible things. Everything that's built around us is through the hard back burner of men coming together and working as a team. But I do think that men are also starving appreciation. Would you agree with that, mate?
There's definitely some presence of expectation versus appreciation, and a lot of the times that's what men in general struggle with, is that, well, that's expected of you. Like that doesn't need validation or praise. That's your duty and responsibility.
That's your job.
Right. It's good that you did that, and yeah, that's appreciated, but you don't need like a special accommodations for it. Like, what do you mean? And that even comes down, to raises and things like that, where it's like, even just hearing like, hey, good job, or like, hey, I'm proud of you. Like we that's not in our rhetoric because it's expected. You're supposed to be doing a good job. That was one thing I struggled with as a kid, where it was like, I didn't get validation for the things I did well, but I got consequenced for the things that I didn't. So it was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to not do bad things because I just don't want to avoid that. But what am I doing otherwise? Like, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's difficult. If we look throughout history, going through World War II wasn't fun for men. Going through the Great Depression wasn't fun. Staying on the Titanic and dying wasn't fun. But we know that men have shown us that, we go through hardship, we overcome adversity and obstacles and setbacks, but we are programmed to wanting to protect and provide. And notably, I can think of something that happened in your country, mate. So there was a mass shooting that happened in 2012 at a cinema. I spoke about this too.
Yeah, Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado. Yeah. And there was a story of 4 boyfriends that jumped in front of the bullets to protect their girlfriends. All 4 men died and all 4 women survived. That is one of the most fucking heroic things I can think of. I mean, a man that's actually willing to risk his life to protect those around him. And I always say too, mate, I would rather die a hero than live as a coward. I think it's in men's natural proclivity to wanting to protect. And we had a mass stabbing that happened over here in Australia, mate, last year. 6 people died in a shopping mall. It just fucking blew up. And in a crisis like that, that's when men want to step up. And I do think too that men want to feel needed. They want to feel capable. They want to feel powerful. But can you walk through the steps on what you did to just get to a place where you're feeling, you're feeling that sense of achievement? Because I look at progress, right? Progress for me makes me happy. I'm just how I am programmed, mate. Like, I feel happy when I'm working out, even though it's fucking hard and I'm in a puddle of sweat and I feel like spewing, like I'm fucking sick after a leg session. Or if I'm rolling with a high level black belt, like if we're wrestling, and I'm rolling with a high level black belt, like I've got a friend of mine. We're both jiu-jitsu black belts, but he's about 100 and something kilos. When he's on top of me, mate, and I'm fucking trying to get out of side control, it is fucking hard work. Yeah. But once I slap in pants and I'm in there, I'm not thinking about anything else. Like, I'm not worrying about all the pressures of life and, what I've got, bills to pay. I'm in there, mate. I'm trying to survive. Like, he's literally trying to strangle me and I'm trying to strangle him. But what do you think, what do you wish more men should know on how to sort of better navigate their way through overcoming obstacles?
You have to first identify what is the legitimacy of the threat. Like, is this an actual threat? Maslow's hierarchy, which I emphasize really well in, I think, chapter 8 or 9 of the book, really kind of goes through and helps you realize and recognize that people have so many struggles in the first 3 tiers. So first one's food, water, shelter. Second one's overall well-being. Third one's personal relationships. Fourth tier is personal identity. And then top tier self-actualization. Everyone's trying to figure out the top 2 without having good securities in the bottom 3 of Maslow's hierarchy. And it's designed as a pyramid. So how is it that you're supposed to obtain level 4 and 5, so personal identity and self-actualization, if you don't have good securities in the things below you? And so part of the problem and part of the things that we struggle with is that oftentimes the reason why men don't know how to ask for help is because we don't even fucking know who we are.
That's so true. Yeah. One of the most difficult things men have is expressing vulnerability, Adam. And
Well,
I
I
spoke
wanted to.
about this.
You've said that word so many times, and it's such a good word to use because the word in and of itself, vulnerable. When we think of that word, there is no other context to the word vulnerable except for life threatening. That's how men hear that word. Vulnerable means life threatening because that's our hunter-gatherer brain that hears that, not our, the female brain is designed differently and receives, and processes things differently because they're naturally designed as caregivers. And so men, we don't have those. We have higher testosterone. We have higher, we fight. We don't run. I have to protect you, not the three behind me, because I have to keep those, alive, the mother and the two children.
Yeah.
And so that's because, again, if we think about the logic and kind of what you were saying is that, well, you don't create milk. You're not necessary after the child's born. You weren't necessary for the 9 months that the child was being, procreated. You did your duty. There's other animals in the world that they'll eat you. Black Widow, your dinner. You did your part, your dinner. I'm going to go have my kids and we're going to go move on with our life. Thank you for your job. Because if you don't make money, you're no use to me.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's part of the difficulty that we absolutely run into on a daily basis.
Yeah. Also, too, Adam, it's not a woman's job to be able to coax a man through going through the hard times, but there is an enormous amount of pressure from society to say, be more vulnerable, be more open, even crying, because also men get shamed. They get shamed all the time. There is still a little bit of that stigma. In particular, I also think that it's hard for women to grapple with because society says, open up. But if a man opens
it's not
up,
just society. There's actual research that they've done with relationship with relationship therapists that have identified that some 60 to 70% of women say that their personal opinion of the men that they are with changes if they witness them crying.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that alone, when men read that statistic, that perpetuates the existing problem that we're actively in. When we understand that crying is not an expression of weakness, it is actually an expression of internal overwhelming. The reason why for a period of time I wasn't crying was because I was trying to fix drywall with however many times I was putting my hand through it, because that was my crying.
yeah.
You realize, I call it teapotting, where, if you put a teapot on the back burner and you don't open it correctly, it can be combustible.
Yeah.
And that energy
And that's
got to go somewhere.
Yeah. And you hit something interesting as well, Adam. You mentioned crying, especially in front of your romantic partner. And, you hear a lot in this red pill space. You hear never open up to a woman, never show vulnerability because she may take it the wrong way. And I have heard a lot of stories where men have opened up to their romantic partner and then maybe a month or two later, they lose attraction for them. And I spoke with a dating and relationships coach about this, and she finds it incredibly sexy when a man actually cries because it's a sign of strength. And even too, mate, like young boys especially are now looking up to people like Andrew Tate, and I even heard on an interview with him with Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan asked Andrew Tate, "Did you cry?" And he goes, "There were tears running down my face, but I did not cry." And Piers Morgan says to him, "That's crying." And he goes, "Oh, I disagree. There were tears running down my face as I did my endless amounts of push-ups." And I'm thinking to myself, here's a dude that praises or influences the masses on what masculinity is. And if you define masculinity and what it means, how can we better educate the public, in particular too? Young boys especially are having a difficult time. They're grappling with the idea of because I was born in the 80s, right, Adam? You know, I had my idols, mate. I had Jean-Claude Van Damme. I had Bruce Lee. I had Chuck Norris. I had Sylvester Stallone. I had Arnold Schwarzenegger. But these young boys, mate, they're confused as fuck. You know what I mean? Like, they're really confused right now. But what can we do, mate? We've got a lot of work to do, especially women, I think, need to understand how to better create a safe space, in particular for men to sort of open up.
Right.
But this is the hard thing that we're trying to grapple with, mate. You know, society says, open up. Men can get shamed, not just from their romantic partner, but also from other men.
Right.
We have influencers like Andrew Tate, you know, that are trying to influence the masses. But even he said on camera that he cried when he was in jail. So what the fuck do we do?
I mean, I wish I had an answer for you. You know, I wish it was something that was that convenient and that easy that would make it that, you know, much of a difference. A lot of the struggle that we run into is we're still actively evolving and learning and understanding what is even going on with the expression of emotions and everything. Everything about it. And the thing about it, on top of it, is that there are so many different things going on actively in the world that we can't get a cohesive understanding. Yes, I would love to say that, you know, just because you and I are both men, that our circumstances are kind of, you know, familiar or the same. But if we look at the literal reality of it, you and I are in 2 different days of the week. So there is no possible way that we can have the exact same experience. You and I are in the exact same moment right now, but we're not, because we're not even on the same side of the world. And so it has to start at a micro level before it gets to a macro level. And I think oftentimes we have these troubles where people want to fix things at a macro level. And it's like, hold on, we've got to understand, what is this individual's struggles? Yes, we can generalize, you know, some things, but also what is this individual's struggles? And so just creating these abilities and these platforms for men to find, I don't want to call them safe spaces, but just spaces where they can actively say, you know, what's going on. The problem with it is that we are still from, I was born in 87, so I'm 37. So we are born from generations where our previous generations were not equipped with any tools of understanding. You're talking about the Blitz event, and you use the word shell shock. That PTSD was understood as a military diagnosis up until 1984. So we didn't even know that the word post-traumatic stress disorder existed until about 40 years ago. So you're saying that trauma didn't exist before that term, you know, was present? It's like, no, men went through things, you know, all the time. They came back from war broken. Well, not after World War II, because they were praised and everything about that. But every war after that, they didn't come home very good, because every war after that was a little bit different. You know, and so it really kind of changed, you know, the perspective of, you know, what are we supposed to be doing as men? Like, what's your job and duty? What's your responsibility? You know, you've got other countries where they are part of the military, you know, by the time they're 16. And then it's, you know, it's uniformed obligated service from 18 to 22 or 18 to, you know, 24 sometimes, depending on where they're at. I've got a couple UFC guys, a Korean Zombie, you know, he had to take a hiatus there for a minute because he was put on obligated duty by South Korea and had to go, you know, immediately into military duty for that, you know. So again, we have these identities of the titles that we're supposed to hold, and we can't let anything else disrupt or interrupt that. And that's that's again, that trouble. We've got to maintain this status. We've got to maintain this identity. We've got to maintain this perspective. So you cannot show weakness or vulnerability. That means you're broke. Yes. That means you're bad. That means if you are vulnerable, that means you cannot gather and hunt food for the tribe. We can't send you out. You're useless to us. You're no good.
Yeah.
You're earning money for your family. You are not a qualified man.
Adam, how can women play a role in creating a safe space for a man to show vulnerability? It's not their job to fix whatever's going on in a man's life, but if, God forbid, something terrible happens where a man tragically lost his dog, maybe a family member died, his first child was born, obviously he might shed a tear, but a woman sees that, she sees her man cry. How can we better educate women in creating a safer space for men to be vulnerable? And in particular, because men, we know what's required. We know we have to get up and perform regardless on how we feel. But I think, in my opinion, mate, it's totally acceptable for a situation like that where, your dog dies and you shed a tear. And for me, I think I can only think of one relationship that I've been in where this woman was incredibly emotionally intelligent. She didn't shun. She didn't, put me down for showing some vulnerability or crying in front of her. There are some women out there, and I've met them, that do in fact create a safe space, in particular if a man's going through a hard time. But as I said, mate, it's not their job to fix a man, but how can women better create a safe space for a man to show vulnerability?
It's something that can't happen overnight, and it may even take decades, if not longer, because these are ingrained habits and behaviors that have existed for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. What I was saying to you earlier about the development of, brain in men was because the average age of a caveman was 25.
Yes.
So, you had to be, puberty had to happen quick, 12 or 13, and then you had to be strong enough to protect your family. We're afraid of the monster under the bed. Where that originates from is the fact that before we had weapons, we were not top of the food chain. Big cats were. Saber-toothed tigers, they have on historical record of fossils with human bones inside of them. So that means we were not top of the food chain. So we have ingrained fears that exist within us. And so now, we have to be the natural protectors. We can't show fear. You think of the hero complex that firefighters deal with, how are you supposed to lead somebody out of a fire if you're panicking? And all these other kinds of emergencies, And so, what does a woman do to help? Well, that's where a woman's just got to be able to allow somebody to say, like, hey, I may not know what you're struggling with, but I'm always here if you need something. That's all that needs.
That's what they want.
Here and talk about what happened for the next 2 or 3 hours. I go back to what I was saying to you with the 3 questions. You okay? Do you need help? Can I do anything? Ask that to a man, and you're good. That man will know. He will feel validated. He will feel, he will feel heard, and he'll feel understood, even if he says no to all 3 of those questions. Just knowing you have that accessible point, and that's where, going back to what you were saying about like quality friendships, and I don't have people that I see every day. But I have people in my phone that if I was struggling, I would know I can say, hey. And if I said, hey, they would know, hey, he's saying, hey, for good reason. It's not just random. And those are the types of relationships that we have to be able and be willing to develop.
Yeah. I think of our war heroes, Adam, and the times when men have come back from war and what the wives and girlfriends would have done to support their husband, coming back. I think about it from early civilizations, men coming back from war, seeing some horrific fucking things, mate, limbs of people blown off and children dying, war is fucking terrible. But if you think about World War II, the men coming back after that, and they would have had some traumatic experiences, mate. They probably would have woken up with night terrors and sweating in their sleep. And I wonder how the women would have been able to handle that back in those days, mate.
They didn't know how to. That was the trouble. Nobody did. We literally, the term shell shock that you used earlier, do you know what that term means? It means when you poke your head too high above the trench and your metal helmet gets clipped. That's what literal shell shock means. It's not the post-traumatic stress condition, blah, blah. That's the clinical definition. But where that real term originates from is if you poke your head too high above that trench and you get clipped, that's going to stick with you forever.
Yes.
And and again, we didn't know. So you're talking about 1914. You go J.R.R. Tolkien and you read The Hobbit and you realize that the book The Hobbit and Smaug the Dragon is about his traumatic experience during World War I. When you realize that J.R.R. Tolkien is writing about his post-traumatic stress disorder and using a personification of Smaug the Dragon, it changes the entire book. And again, we didn't put that together until years later because J.R.R. Tolkien didn't even realize that that's what he was writing about. He didn't distinctly say, "Oh, I survived war. I'm going to write a book. What should it be about? A dragon steals gold and we'll have a guy go on a big adventure." Like, no, it's, and that's how we express ourselves through art. And that's sometimes how men put their stories out there. And so we have to find expressive and effective ways. You and I are, not tattooed equally. I got a full sleeve on one side and a half sleeve on another. But every single one of my tattoos has a very distinct history to it. That's how I carry my stories.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how we use expressively. When we don't know how to verbalize it, we find other alternatives to express it, in effective ways. And if we have partners and if we have friends and family that can receive that and understand that and know kind of what to pay attention to, that becomes really, really helpful. So we don't just have to communicate with words. We can use other things too.
Yeah. I'm not too sure, Adam, if you have children yourself. But I work with kids, mate. I teach martial arts to adults, but also kids, in particular Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Mate, I think one of the best things that we can do for children is teach them about resiliency and overcoming hardship and obstacles, because there's nothing that's going to hit you harder than life. And there was that famous Rocky Balboa quote. I can't remember how it goes, but it's a fantastic quote with Sylvester Stallone in one of the Rocky movies. He says something like, "It's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." And I try and implement that into teaching my kids, in particular young boys, mate, because they're confused as fuck. You know what I mean? Like we have people online that they tend to gravitate towards. And even too, I think women also are finding it difficult to find their own femininity, because they're in constant competition with men. We each have different roles to play and we come together, we form a beautiful family, we're a team. And, as I said, mate, I have my idols, Van Damme, Seagal, Schwarzenegger, Bruce Lee, what do these young boys got? They're looking at Andrew Tate and they're looking for a way to kind of figure out what their place is in the world, mate. But what can we do to better educate kids on how to deal with overcoming resiliency and setback?
I wish I had an answer for that, but unfortunately, and this is the part that sucks the most, is that you're not going to learn until you experience.
That's true.
I can't sit here and tell you. I can give you a bunch of recommendations. Like, it's beyond that horse and water thing, because honestly, you are not. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. I mean, that's a Mike Tyson quote. So it's, you can really I really wish it was that easy. I really, really wish it was that easy. But it's not. And that's the hardest part about it. I think obviously, you know, the speed of internet, created the downfall of man. You know, I grew up in the 90s where I didn't have
Yep.
internet. And then by the time I was 15, it took 15 minutes to get onto the internet. So that gave
I
me
remember.
time to actually
Yeah.
like think about like, what am I going to do? You know, am I going to make good life choices when I'm on the internet for the next 8 minutes? Because that's all that I'm, you know, can be on there for. So it's just really interesting, you know. Yes, you can have these, to what level can you actually like promote change and actually initiate things? And that's where you have to have consistency of thought and feeling, and being able to advocate and say like, hey, you are not alone in the way that you think and feel about this scenario or situation. That's where you have to start and begin. Being able to openly say like, hey, as a man, I have no issue crying because I know that that's biologically what my body sometimes needs to do to protect other people, you know. And being able to get into the scientific understanding, there's a phenomenal book called The Body Keeps the Score that actually goes through the neurological understanding of what happens to the brain after a traumatic experience. How does it actually become rewired from a neurocognitive level? Now that we understand trauma, and once you make it into a science and not so much an art, you know, and it's this little soft woo-woo thing, like, oh, we're going to make you feel good and we're going to make you nice. And no, we're going to make you better. Let's, you know, how you feel right now is interfering with your quality of life. Let's make it better. I'm not here to, you know, I used to tell people that all the time, like, oh, what do you want out of therapy? Or what do you want out of these services? Well, I just want to be happy. Well, I'm not going to guarantee that. And honestly, I don't know if that's going to happen, because that's, you know, that is no guarantee. And if you look at the way that emotions actually are, like, that's often what we struggle with the most, is that we don't know how to express emotions. Would you say to me that anger is an emotion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sadness, anger, happiness, you know,
So you're
but I think
saying anger is an emotion, and anger is an emotion that you feel, or is
it's a,
anger an emotion that you show?
yeah, it's a feeling as a consequence of your external influence, I guess. But what do you think?
It's a behavioral expression to an internal feeling that we don't know how to verbalize. Go back to what I was saying. It's a lot easier for me to put a hole in the wall of the drywall than it is to deal with anybody dying in my life. First 3 people that were significant that died, I put a hole in the wall. The 4th person that died, I didn't put a hole in the wall, but I still didn't manage it very well. So I guess that's some level of progress, but also at the same time, I didn't do anything different, you know? And so being able to really get into the understanding of, okay, grief is love that we can no longer express to the person that used to be there. That's what I'm upset about. Oh, wait, I'm not angry. I just shifted the word. Upset and angry, but those are synonyms. No, they're not. We can get into a whole breakdown of definitions. Anger, frustration, resentment, livid, you know, those are all different in their expressive nature. They're different in their intensity. They're different in their understanding. And so if we as people change and expand our vocabulary of what's actually going on with us, it enables us the ability to actually help other people understand. If you don't understand me, is that my fault or yours?
It's my fault.
No, it's always mine.
Your fault.
It is not the recipient's fault for not receiving the message that I delivered incorrectly. If I can't get you to understand something that I say, I have to either say it differently or I have to give it to you in a different way of communication, whether it's written, whether it's drawn, whether it's whatever. I'm the one at fault. I can't come down here to Mexico and look at somebody and say, I don't speak your fucking language. Like, don't talk to me. I don't know what you're saying to me. It's like, no, you don't get that. I witness people do that down here, and it's disgusting, but it's just like, you don't get that ability. You can't say, well, I don't know that, therefore I'm not going to do it.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting too, Adam. When I was talking just before about teaching kids overcoming resiliency and hardship and obstacles, it's that byproduct of doing something that's difficult that gives you that sense of achievement and gratification.
There's one
Sorry, we're going
word
to
you
say
always have to match with perseverance, and that's resiliency. Perseverance and
resiliency.
resiliency always have to go together, because resiliency is the integrity or strength, but the perseverance is the actual forging ahead.
Yeah.
And collectively, they've got to be that, two-part combined.
Yeah. I also think too, Adam, that we're seeing delayed family formations. We see a huge rise in divorce, especially. We see broken homes. If you look at most men that are incarcerated in prisons, usually come from single parent homes. We know from stats that, especially if the father isn't present in the home, that they're more likely to participate in gang violence. They're more likely at higher rate of crime. They're more likely to have mental health episodes. And I think also we're not supposed to be in a family where we have a single parent. And unfortunately, you just have to do the best you can. If there is a situation where the father isn't present or even the mother isn't present, that parent is doing the best that they can. But I think also young boys, and in particular girls too, they're looking for some role model. They're looking for someone that they can learn from to guide them and say, hey, look, things are tough at the moment, but you will get through this.
Right.
And I always revert back to martial arts. Like one of the greatest gifts my mum ever gave me was enrolling me in martial arts. The two greatest gifts she gave me was life and martial arts. Because I've acquired multiple black belts in different styles, but martial arts has just been the vehicle to help me push through overcoming obstacles and hardships. But what can parents do, mate? Like, it is fucking hard, mate. There's no fucking roadmap. How can parents help their kids? What do we need to do? Because as you said, you and I are both born in the 80s. We didn't have the internet. I can remember, going to the video store and renting out movies. It was fun. I used to enjoy that. But now everything is just so instantaneous. You want to log on and watch a movie? It's right there. You want to order something off Amazon, it'll arrive at your door in the next couple of days. We have everything is so instantaneous, but I think also, I think there's a part missing in especially Gen Z. Gen Z hasn't really been taught how to connect on an emotional level. I was in a shopping center a few years ago, 4 young kids, literally within close proximity at it, all 4 of them on their fucking phones doing this shit. You know what I mean? Like, I think we've forgotten how to connect, mate. But as someone that might be listening, that a parent that might be listening to this that's having a difficult time with their child, what can parents do to better help their children?
I mean, you gotta take it back to where we originated and get back into like traditional forms of communication. The way that friendships used to be developed when we were young were the people that we lived next to, or the people that we did sports with, or the people that we went to school with. And now you got, people that are friends with people in all kinds of other different countries because of the access to the internet and whatever else, which that's great and everything, but if you don't have like person-to-person dynamic relationships, then where are you actually like learning effective communication skills and interpersonal effectiveness and all these other essential, necessary resources and tools for society, for you to actually figure out what you're going to do and what your purpose and reason is. And I think that's what a lot of the trouble is. I'm not by any means saying that it's too far lost and it's too far gone, but there's definitely it's going to take a lot and it's going to take a while, but there has to be, something on a cohesive level that gets us in general back to, a level of understanding of just how to be human people and not be so shitty.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, mate. Where to from here? I don't know. But there's a lot of things that society is grappling with right now, in particular, this next generation, coming up in the world. Because I've got my nieces and nephews, and my brother's wife said to me, I want you to put my kids into martial arts. I want you to teach them because, I think it is just so helpful just getting a child into some sort of physical sport,
Right.
because it teaches them about camaraderie,
Right.
friendship, working as a team. It doesn't have to be martial arts. It can be soccer. It can be rugby.
Right.
Women, especially if they play netball, working as a team, it teaches them a lot. And I think there are tools, especially to really help kids, mate. But where to from here, mate? We definitely have a lot of work to do. But Adam, can you, just before we go, mate, can you tell people what's happening with you, in particular with events? You mentioned a TED Talk, and also where can people find you?
So I'm actively on Instagram. So Instagram is adam.may.motivates. My website is askadamconsulting.com. The name of the book is A Fox and a Bear Trap, a book on how to ask for help. It's available throughout the world on Amazon. If you would like a hard copy, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly, and I can direct ship a hard copy to you. Otherwise, paperback is available in Australia. And then all throughout the rest of the world, it's predominantly available on hardback on the Western Hemisphere, and it seems to be mostly just paperback on the Eastern Hemisphere. So blame Amazon for that. Other than that, like I said, I actively live in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, operating a stem cell clinic, so Renew Medical Center in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. I am going to relocate back to Kansas City, Missouri for a period of time to manage some of my personal consulting projects. Sheath Underwear, again, is one of my consulting clients. Best underwear in the world, sheath.com. And other than that, just kind of stay tuned. I'm going to be really dedicating 2025 to be doing public speaking and really kind of pushing the book. Hopefully, we'll be on a TED Talk stage in Folsom, California in late August. I should have the results of that application back at the end of March. And other than that, that's everything.
Yeah, amazing, Adam. I'll have to hit you up again in the future, mate, and do a part 2 because,
Absolutely.
mate, I could talk to you for hours, mate. I just find you very interesting, and I think part 2, I'd love to dive deeper in the human brain. Understanding the emotional responses and physiological responses that happen. And, I just find it fascinating, mate, learning about our lizard brain, the amygdala,
Yep.
Your prefrontal cortex, and, going into your fight, flight, or freeze response. I'm sure you would have a wealth of knowledge in that, mate, and I'd love to pick your
Definitely
brain
pick
again.
up a copy of Body Keeps the Score and of my book as well. But definitely keep a Body Keeps the Score because I think you would just absorb a lot of it, especially with the brain science and getting into the actual understanding of the watchtower and everything kind of else. So absolutely, call me anytime, and if you want to fly me to Australia, I haven't been there in 20 years. I thought I was
We'd love to have
dying
you,
the
mate.
last time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Adam, I'm
So-
going to put you in contact with Jim Bernardo. As I mentioned, he's a trauma and recovery coach. I'm going to put you in
I love
contact
that.
with him,
That's
mate.
perfect.
So once we log off, I'll reach out to him and I'll get you in contact with him, mate. Because Jim's doing some amazing work. He's really helping men. Especially with the high stats of suicide that's happening all over the world in men. There's a lot more work to do, mate. But I'll put you in contact with him. But Adam,
Beautiful.
thank you, mate, for jumping on.
Always.
As I said, I could talk to you for hours, mate. I really could. And we'll definitely have to do a part 2 soon.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks,
Bye.
Adam.
Bye.